And we're back. BeerCon 1 continues here with a true legend in information security. Welcome, MZBat.
I'm laughing.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad because it's 3:15 in the morning here. So I'm glad you're in a good mood. Actually, it's delightful to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing this. I hope that you meet your charitable goals for this
We
2019.
We are working hard. And yes, I thank you for reminding me. It has been precisely an hour since our last donation. So please, if you can find it in your heart, to support us and what we're doing, especially when the beneficiary is the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Mental Health Hackers, it would truly be appreciated. So, Ms. Bat, a legend, a huge outspoken advocate on Twitter. What was your view of 2019? Was it a good year? Was it a not so great year?
Oh gosh. Um, so, I think we've had better years, but we've had worse years too, right? Like
Okay.
from a security perspective, I think that we saw some pretty big breaches, but I think like it's just a trend now that we just keep seeing giant breaches and they're not really a surprise anymore. So, we have a lot going on politically here in the United States that made it
A challenging year
a
to say the
challenging
least.
year. Yeah. And as you know, or maybe you don't, I was fed working for the federal government, the US federal
Hmm.
government, until the end of April this year. So this year saw me make the move to the private sector. So that was huge. And I see it as a huge positive for me for 2019 for
Well, I
sure.
also hope so. It was a giant injection into your bank account because I do know that the federal government isn't known for affluent
I,
amount of compensation.
that is true. However, I am sort of a a believer that security folks and technical folks and engineers in general should do, a stint in the federal space,
Hmm.
at least 2 years to really be able to understand the challenges. Because it's easy to complain about all the things that the government's doing wrong with tech, but until you're really embedded in it and want to affect positive change and find that you're completely unable to, it's kind of hard to really grasp that monumental challenge. So yes, the feds do not pay as well as the private sector. However, there are some agencies that have implemented special hiring authority to bring folks in at higher pay levels than normally tech folks would come in at.
Well,
So
that's good to
not a
hear.
big win, but yeah, the benefits are nice.
Sure. And actually, that's a huge problem that maybe you could comment a little bit on because I know here, at least in the UK, what they pay police officers and specialized cybercrime folks is appalling in comparison to the private sector. And in fact, one of the largest criticisms of the lack of police capability in the UK has been those appalling wages. I'm delighted to hear that there's more parity, but I mean, having come from federal service, there's some fairly draconian personal security requirements, as in you can't have been busted for something as innocuous as marijuana, correct?
Well, so the arrest is not so much now, it's conviction.
Okay.
And some of the rules have changed in regards to marijuana only because the United States is broken into 50
The
states, and
states, yeah.
states have made decisions individually about marijuana. So while the feds, it's not legalized federally, um, there's an awareness that folks who live in states where it is legal are not breaking the law in their own states. So some positions, not so much with the the larger law enforcement three-letter
Parts.
agencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they've made exceptions, or they just removed the drug testing
Regime. Yeah.
component part of it from the job descriptions. Yeah. So, but no, but it's still, um, we're not there yet.
So in your transition from federal, which is pretty hierarchical, very, I would say, process procedure driven, and of course approvals at all sorts of crazy levels, and you now suddenly find yourselves in more of a freewheeling kind of, I'm not going to say anything goes, but obviously the rigidity of the federal government hasn't really bleeded over into the civilian world that you're living in. Did you have a bit of a transition challenge with maybe being a little bit too sort of like waiting for the permission to do stuff?
For sure, that's an issue. We call that, it's sort of a stagnant thing that happens in the federal and in the state space, and I'm sure it's probably for local too, but I can't speak to that. But there is definitely a thing that happens in the government and civil service space that if you know how to do something, you change your hat and you go do that thing, and then they lose a person in another department and you change your hat and you do that thing. And so there's a real danger in becoming sort of a jack of all trades, master of none.
Okay.
And that coupled with uh, legacy systems and the number of hoops, so many hoops that you have to jump through to try to modernize any technology, so you're stuck in this legacy space that um, really keeps you from learning and growing. So one of the biggest fears that a lot of my technical friends and colleagues have had moving from the public to the private sector is that they just are worried they're not caught up. They don't
Right.
know what they're doing. And so I certainly, the first 60 days, I had, had those moments where, oh, I'm the director of security engineering. Why am I waiting for somebody to give me permission to do this? Or more so, have like the founders of the company I work for, it's called Truss, based out of San Francisco. But have the founders say, we hired you as the director, like do what you think is the right thing. And that
Yeah.
was, I was a director of infrastructure engineering in the federal space and didn't have that.
Authority,
Yes,
the ability to execute.
correct. So
So,
it's definitely culture shock.
but in a good way, because obviously you're, and especially I get the impression, especially from Twitter, you like to get things done, you like to accomplish things, you like to affect change. So this is now your rise, if you will, in order to really drive agendas forward.
Yes, and the beauty of working where I work now is that we do, in fact, have uh, federal clients. So I'm
You have the
getting,
relationships as well.
yeah, right. So, but I'm actually the, like, they'll listen to us as their contractors in a way that they didn't listen or couldn't make changes when I was embedded internally in that space. So I'm actually like helping um, on projects that I used to actually like work on as a Fed and couldn't get any traction, and now can like direct the the security path that we take and architect the systems and then deliver those systems. So it's really fascinating.
Just the
But
change,
yeah,
just the job change in how you're perceived.
yeah, but like definitely pour one out for my Fed homies who are
Yeah.
still in there trying to get stuff done because it's hard.
Well,
Can I ask?
you're
Can
gonna
I ask?
hire all of them.
I've
I
got.
did coach Eric Burgess, so my
Yeah.
my colleague who runs Nolicon.
Yeah. Mike, you got a question?
Yeah, quick question for you, Ms. Bat. Miss Bat. Um, in your Twitter profile, you've got no as a service
Yeah.
as a thing, right? And I kind of think I know what that means, but would you mind explaining it?
Yeah, sure. I actually have that on my work profile too. Um, so it's a bit snarky, right? But
Yeah.
I I say no a lot. Can we integrate this application? No. Can we use this plugin? No. Um, can we run this instance? No. And it's turned into a I don't know, it's more of a methodology. I've found like okay, insurance companies do it here and it's shitty. But they will decline something the first time it comes through, right? Or say no, and then you submit an appeal and then they reconsider it and then they consider it actually. So I think that a lot of changes that are made in infrastructure are just made by people who come in and they've always done it that way. So they want to keep doing it that way. And then what you end up with is three or four different CI tools in your infrastructure or five different tracking systems in your infrastructure or
Sure.
whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a joke, but not really, because if I say no the first time around, um, that means that I need you to come back to me with a real reason why I need to introduce this into our infrastructure and and do that by coming to me to say we have this tool but it doesn't do this type of deployment or it's not it doesn't meet the needs for this particular part of our life cycle and I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think you did, and I think
So,
ultimately we don't as people say no enough.
uh,
I think we
right.
say yes too often.
So,
It's true. It's true.
So I have a kind of follow on from that. So if we look at businesses today, there's a push to move things faster, deploy more. Do you think that has an impact on us saying no, where we often pressure just to say yes, just to get out the door and look better?
Yeah, but I don't completely hate the idea of just diving in hard and fast and doing the thing and delivering. Um, I think that I think both ways of approaching a problem can be valid, right? The meticulous, um, research oriented, cautious approach to delivery. There's a place for that.
Mm.
But there's also a place for innovation and experimentation. And, you know, you might fail. And I think people are so afraid of failing that they stop experimenting and stop trying new things.
Agreed.
But, you know, history is made by people who take chances.
Yeah.
So, I think it depends, would be my answer.
Okay.
so I want to talk a little bit about the future for you in 2020. I mean, you're a huge force, I think, in the community. You're very open about when you're having a good day and when you're not having a good day. Um, are you going to continue sort of as a community advocate, or are you finding that your new responsibilities with private sector are sort of impacting the time that you have to spend there in that place?
That's a good question. First and foremost, I'll say that the folks that I work for are 100% supportive of you know just me being me. So that's amazing, and we encourage individuality at Trust, and um, so what to share, what not to share. I'll You're right. I'll share if I'm having a bad day. Um, I will not ever throw a colleague or a client under the bus, even vaguely by subtweeting about it. So, for sure, my Twitter is definitely more like personal, I guess. But I think it's important because it's just reality. I think that people who curate their lives on social media to look like this super perfect thing are really doing a disservice to folks who do struggle with things like social anxiety or depression or mental health issues, because you're painting an unrealistic picture of what your life is really like. So I think it's okay to say, like, this sucks, or I got out of bed today. And so let's just call that a win. Or to say, like, I couldn't get out of bed today. Um, and it's just, I don't know. I really don't like, um I mean, people, I certainly wouldn't want to curate anyone else's social media life, and people are free to live their best life. I'm not the kind of person who is going to pretend that living my best life means that every day is a perfect day.
Yeah.
It's just disingenuous, I feel like.
Do you feel like, do you consider yourself kind of a role model, somebody that, a lot of people in the community look up to, or do you just sort of consider yourself kind of a regular person, a regular, that just happens to have a giant following of people? So how do you sort of balance that in sort of your mind?
I So no, I don't think of myself as a role model, but I am acutely aware of the number of folks from um, different backgrounds and experiences who follow me, and I do my best to provide, like, to try to be positive
Yeah.
for folks, even when I don't really have much
Much
to give
positive
that
in the
day.
tank. Yeah.
Sure, sure, because there are folks who have it worse than I do, for sure. I don't think it's cool to drag people on Twitter. Like, I certainly call out predators, but
Yeah.
just in general, like, people just being douches because they think it's funny or edgy or whatever. That's just not really who I am.
But you've been in the community for quite a time, and I've asked this question for some of the people that have been there almost from the beginning. Um, do you see it getting better? Do you see it getting worse? Some folks have sort of said, yeah, it seems to be policing itself. Behavior is being called out more often. Other folks have had sort of a more of a contrary um, uh, uh, view. Where are you sitting on it? Is this industry maturing, or are we descending
um,
into chaos?
well, I would certainly hope that we're maturing. The you know, you can't fix 30 years of
Bad behavior.
bad behavior or internalized misogyny,
Yeah,
or we'll use the word patriarchy, right? Like,
sure.
tech has been very, very male driven, and it's going to take some time for that culture shift to happen. I think that it's unrealistic to think it could happen quickly. Um, if the diversity pipeline were that easy to just snap our fingers, fix, and then all of a sudden it's like, kumbaya, and everyone's happy and everything's copacetic, like, we would have done that, right?
Right.
But these changes now, where um, companies recognize the importance of having a diverse team, understand the importance of dismissing predators, for the community to recognize that just because someone's a contributor to the community doesn't mean that's, carte blanche to behave inappropriately toward
Yeah.
other members of the community, um, based on, any of the gender, religion, race, um,
Right. Gotcha.
identity. It, I would like to think that the tides are turning, only because when I go to conferences now, I'm not the only woman in the
Yeah.
room. So for me, that seems like a win. Um, the company I work for is 50% not folks who identify as male. I think that's incredible. So I think change starts at home, and it's going to take a little while to turn this ship around. But I think knowing that we need to turn it around means that we're headed in a better direction.
That's great. That's just really positive. So we're winding down, I think, on the time that we have. What sort of advice do you have to folks that are, thinking about starting into this career, or maybe even more appropriately, coming from federal or military service and thinking about going into the private sector? Because I think that's a great experience that you've recently had that you can talk about.
Sure. I think that first I would say, good job for serving any time as a civil servant. Um, and I would just say maybe don't worry so much about what you think you don't know. Um, there's always a need, and the folks who are out there in the private sector hiring former civil servants, or hiring folks out of civil service, they know, they already know, they know that you've been working on legacy systems, they
Mhm.
know that the processes are messed up, they know that you're used to reporting up, to a 5 or 6 supervisory chain to get a simple change done. So it's the resilience is what they're looking for. And if you serve in, 2 years or more in civil service, like, you're resilient. And so I think potential employers will recognize that. I'm also going to plug my workshop. You can go to stabops.com and you'll see a link to the framework for my mock interview and resume review
Yeah.
workshop on GitHub. But there's also a Heroku app if you just want to look at the documents without looking at GitHub. But there are a lot of tips in there for folks who are trying to transition or look for other jobs, right down to culture fit questions, sample technical questions, resources. So it's out there, it's free. And if the goal is for people running their own conferences to take that framework and set up a mentorship thing with the framework at your own conference, and
It's a
contribute.
huge contribution and a huge resource, which has just been, I think, really impactful. And we absolutely thank you and kind of adore you for that effort.
We'll contribute to the repo. If you've got good shit, put it in there.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap you up at that point because we've
Not
got,
literally.
no, well, no, but I believe we've
You have
got
Amanda.
Amanda Berlin next.
Yes.
So
She and I
awesome.
just did a 20-hour road trip, 10 hours
Wow.
to Maryland, spent a day, then 10 hours back last weekend to deliver
Okay.
a cat to its rightful home. So you should ask her about how many cats she's delivered across the country this year.
All right. Oh, that's exciting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.